name is Sarah K. Grace, and this is my first time in Ashland, Oregon, so thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Jordan. And you guys are a high vibe group because my nervous system is like fluttering right now, so thank you very much for welcoming me here. And for Paul Andrews for hosting this. This has been an incredible journey. So I have been a licensed paramedic in California for over 20 years now, which is crazy to think. And in addition, I've been able to see, hear, and feel energy outside of the normal senses since I was 7 years old. I ultimately ended up utilizing those abilities in the 911 system as a paramedic to help countless people through extreme crises and death. So during our time here tonight, I really want to tailor this to you guys too, and engage. I'm going to share my experience, what I saw as a paramedic in those moments of death. I'm going to also share about, just going to ground myself here for a second. Thank you. I love all you already. I'm also going to share my struggles coming to acceptance with my abilities. It's been a long, long road to acceptance and understanding of being so energetically sensitive. So how many in here are healers? Almost everybody, wonderful. And do we have any seers, energetic seers? Great. Anybody here? Some? A little bit? How about the feelers? Got a lot of feelers too. Wonderful. And so what I'd like to do after I kind of share my story and my experience is open it up to Q&A and kind of tailor it to you guys into the group, okay? And so as a paramedic, well, you know what, I'm going to circle back first and talk about, I was raised in a tiny town in South Dakota, 2,000 people, right on the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, pre-internet. So I couldn't just Google like what was going on. And I was just a 7-year-old kid cruising around on my bike and just, doing my thing. And one morning I woke up and I could see auric fields around people. So I could see colors, and that was kind of my first sign. Did you see? I learned. Wonderful. Okay. So I woke up and was able to see colors, and I didn't think much of it because I was just a little kid, so I thought that this is how everybody, was. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, what happened for me was my sensitivities increased every few days. And I went from being able to see auric fields in color. It looks very much like the aura around a lamppost at night. And you can kind of see that. It looks like that to me, except it's swimmy and it's got a lot of different colors and different data and information. From there, I was able to feel very deeply other people's feelings, and I'm sure a lot of you guys in here can relate to how that is. So from there, it went to being able to hear, and saying out loud, especially in today's culture, that you can hear voices. It's kind of a dicey proposition, because Western medicine doesn't necessarily welcome that, right? And so, but now I understand that that's one of the gifts. But again, as a child, I didn't have a stable nuclear family upbringing. I didn't have a stable structure. So I was navigating kind of the high velocity of that. And then for me to be able to sense and perceive all of this data and information around people, I felt very disconnected, very expanded, almost like I was being electrocuted. Oftentimes I felt really spacey and ungrounded. And so finally, after I was then able to progress to being able to see Native American spirits from off of the reservation, and then ultimately deceased loved ones. And so it was when I started seeing the spirits that I was like, all right, what is this business? Like, I gotta know. So I finally asked my family, and unfortunately I got the hellfire and brimstone, don't ever talk about this out loud, we will send you to the loony bin, literally. And so as a kid, that's terrifying, because all we want for most of us is to fit in, right? We want to be, quote, normal, which most of us understand there's no such thing now, right? Thank goodness. But we want to fit in. We want a semblance of identity and safety and love and connection. And so not having that from my nuclear family and then being shamed, I really, at that moment, that very young and pivotal moment, swallowed a deep sense of toxic shame and really thought that there was something significantly wrong with me. And so I tried really hard for a long, long time to shut it down. And initially that looked like overachieving. I was excelling in high school, I was running 1,000,000 miles in track and cross country, I was doing anything I could to kind of anesthetize or calm my system down. Well, ultimately, when my mom died abruptly when I was 17, my world, what was there, even though it was volatile, it's what I knew, and it crumbled. And so from my experience, I went off the rails pretty hardcore with drugs and alcohol, and I was just searching for some sense of safety. I just needed a timeout. I needed a break from all of it, and I didn't understand it. And so I actually had an overdose, and I had my own near-death experience when I was 19 years old. And during that time is when I was given a choice. And it's funny because I remember at the time kind of floating in expansion, going into more of the unity consciousness experience and just kind of the bliss experience of being out of the pain and the suffering. And finally, and I was like, yes! And I heard this voice say, "You're not done." And I was like, oh no, like I'm good. You know, I don't want to go back there. But ultimately, this voice, which was familiar to me, a female voice, which was familiar. Come on in, guys, welcome. Thanks for joining. Gave me the choice and said, you know, she was a lot more eloquent than I'm going to be, but it was essentially, we understand this is a hard path, and if you choose to stay, you're actually going to be able to help a lot of people with it. So obviously I chose to stay. I decided to come back and be embodied, and I was foolish in thinking that because I chose to stay incarnated, that spirit would just lay everything out for me nice and easy and like give me the plan, you know? I would just somehow know. Yeah, no. I still had to pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I still had to face all of my fears and get a handle on my own addictions, which I did. And so it took me quite a while, and it was quite a bit of heavy lifting, but I really just buckled down, and I just knew from that point that there was something more. I didn't know what that was at the time, but I could just feel that there was something more. So I eventually got myself out, after living all over the country and doing a lot of things, I got myself out to Los Angeles, and I went to the UCLA EMT program. And my intuition had been kind of nudging me, but I have to tell you, and I think this is important, you guys, because to me, all of us are gifted. You guys are incredibly gifted in your own right as well, and we all have something to offer. And my journey, I was terrified of when I was kind of getting this intuitive nudge to go be a paramedic. I was like, nah, I could kill people. You know, that's a big deal. Like, how would I know how to do that, you know? Little did I realize there's a million steps between where you start and then when you're actually ultimately out there working. And I think that's important for all of us, because collectively right now, a lot of us are being invited into our own gifts, into our own power, and sometimes we can be scared of what that means and how that might express, right? Are we good? Keep going? Just roll. Okay. So I went through the UCLA EMT program. And for those of you guys who are not familiar, EMS, which is Emergency Medical Services, is predominantly alpha male energy. It's very, very militaristic. It's unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And I've got to tell you, I just fit right in. I just was like, oh my gosh, I love this, because these guys were all super intense, and you know, people kind of call it like it is, and it's a very obviously high stress and adrenalized environment, which, because my childhood had been so violent, I was actually subconsciously used to that chaos and that intensity. So once I graduated the EMT program, I decided, and why wouldn't I'm one of those go big or go home people, so I went to work in South Central Los Angeles, and I covered Compton and Inglewood for the first 2 years of my 911 career. And it was absolutely incredible. Truly, I learned so much, not only about myself, but about humanity and the human condition, and it's one of those sink or swim. You're going to find out really quick if A, you can do this job, and B, you have what it takes. So the first 6 months, and we were extremely high call volume. It was just nonstop. And everything under the sun, obviously the traumas with the drive-bys and the homicides and the stabbings and the shootings and the gang violence and the retaliation and then the everyday calls or heart attacks and strokes, and it's just really the 911 system was voracious. And Spirit granted me about a 6-month window, which I just appreciated. I didn't know, right? But my gifts weren't, it was just, I was just there in the field learning how to run a 911 call, because there's a lot of mechanics that go to that. Well, about 6 months in, when I think I kind of got proficient, I was like, okay, kind of know which end is up on a call. All of a sudden, my gifts and my abilities started to come through me. Oh, I didn't want to have anything to do with it, you guys. I resisted. I really was unhappy with it initially because I finally fit in somewhere. I finally felt like I had a, quote, respectable job, like my family finally accepted me. I finally, kind of had this connection. And I didn't want to be the weird girl who sees dead people in, colors, right? I didn't want to say this, especially to the SWAT dudes. You guys ever hung out with those guys, They're intimidating, but they're actually really nice. So initially, it was nothing I was trying to do. But on a call, as soon as we would get there and arrive, the energy for me, my experience was that it would just expand outwardly and become very much like the Matrix. In that, I mean that everything would slow down, crystallize, become silent, and everything and nothing happens simultaneously. So for me, it became a symphony, okay? One of my tells for death, and I don't know why this is, but it's always, even to this day, is that I taste metal. I taste metal and I know that death is near. And in a call, I would get out and I'd be walking towards the scene and I would energetically expand out and I would know what was going to happen 2 or 3 paces before it did. And so that actually was beneficial. But the first, CPR that I ran, very high energy, very intense. We're dealing with the family on scene. It's a really traumatic, pivotal moment for a family. And not understanding energetics, not understanding that I'm ultra sensitive and that I can easily absorb other people's energy if I didn't know what I was doing, I would oftentimes take on the family's energy while still simultaneously having to perform, CPR or some sort of intervention to help the family. And so there was I navigated this. It really made me question whether or not I was going to be able to do this, to be honest with you, because the intensity of the scene was so crazy. But I have to tell you, what I began seeing and noticing in the moments of death had me ultimately question and change my mind about everything I knew about being sensitive. So in the moments of death, a medical death, and this is just what I began to notice, a medical death, which would be like a hospice situation or an expected death, the chakra systems actually would begin to unfurl like a ribbon starting at the base. And I could literally watch them unfurling and going up as the soul began the process of exiting out the crown of the head. And it was incredible to witness. Now, the soul oftentimes looked like a little mist, and it depended on how much life the person had. If they had a lot of vitality, and passion for life, it would be almost like a plume of color and sparkle. If they were just over it and not, ready to be gone, it was more just kind of a little puff that would come out the crown. But I began to notice, and I actively transitioned probably 30 to 40 people as they were dying, like looking in their eyes as they were dying. And I've seen hundreds of dead bodies in all capacities, shapes, sizes, and stages of decomposition. So I've seen this symphony, if you will, many, many times. But the most beautiful thing to me is, one, that there's nothing to fear in it. Two, that the person, even if they were alone physically, ultimately you're never alone in death. Because what I would witness as we were performing CPR every single time is the deceased loved ones would come in, or there would be angels or celestials that would come in every single time. And it was absolutely exquisite for me, even though I didn't understand, and I still was kind of not wanting to say what I was seeing. I could see it so clearly that the person they may have been going through the transition, even if there was a little bit of pain, but in the moment of release, being welcomed and greeted by loved ones, it was a liberating and freeing experience. And so that was the medical side. The traumatic deaths, now that's a different thing. And this is really what I want to wrap it around back to and really anchor with you guys more than anything, because none of us know when we're going to die. We all think like, I got time. And ultimately, none of us know, which is why I really, really advocate that you live fully now, today, utilizing all of your gifts, all of your abilities, because I cannot tell you how many people I ran calls on that were just driving to work and just got their coffee, pulled out and got T-boned by a huge truck. That was it. They were gone. Or driving on the freeway, same thing, something happens. In a drive-by, there's a million ways, okay? And again, ultimately, we, especially in our Western culture, are not taught really to think about death, right? We're taught, we praise vanity and youth, right? And we kind of hide away in our culture, which to me is unfortunate because there's tremendous wisdom in the older generations, I believe. But ultimately, what I found after seeing it so many times is birth or death is as natural as birth, right? And none of us know when that time will come for us. So in the trauma deaths that I would witness with it being really abrupt like that, every single time there was a celestial. I think it was something to do with the shock that the soul was going through. There was always an angel present, whereas on the expected hospice deaths or end-stage disease process deaths, a lot of times it was more religious archetype or family member. For the trauma, it seemed to be always these beautiful celestial angels. And for that experience, because a lot of times I'd come up on scene and the person, so the soul would be standing next to the body and the soul would look just like the person laying on the ground, except I could see through them. And they could see that I could see them when they have all the other firefighters and everybody else is running around, cutting them out apart, doing whatever we needed to do. I could see them. And so many, many times they'd be looking at the body, looking at me. Looking at the body, looking at me. And then ultimately I developed kind of a protocol of the debriefing, the realization, you are dead. And it usually took a few minutes, depending on the situation, before the celestial presence would come, and it often started like fireflies. It was so amazing to see, because if you can imagine being on scene of a major car accident with all that entails and all of the apparatus and all of the personnel, and standing and, we're working on the physical body, and all of a sudden in the middle of all of it starts these little lights that look like fireflies and began, this is what I would see with my clairvoyance, expanding outwardly into what looked to me like an angel. And the soul then would stand. Some were still very resistant, but for the most part then they would come into acceptance because of that peaceful, loving feeling, and they would turn into the angel, and then I would watch them disappear. And so I witnessed that more times than I can count as well. And honestly, when it started, when all of this was happening initially, like I said, I fought it. I was still heavily closeted. I had a ton of shame around it. I was a top step, senior level medic, like really aggressive in a good way in my treatment protocol, in being a real strong patient advocate. And so I didn't want to jeopardize that again by being weird, right? And how many of us can relate to that, right? And again, this is why I anchor this with you guys, because to me, every one of you has a gift and an ability that you have to offer the world in a way that's unique to you. And mustering the courage to lean into that, especially in today's culture, our lights are needed now more than ever. Which is why I feel like this is happening, where I'm being able to come and speak to more people and start to connect to more people and get the message out there so that we can start to normalize being energetically sensitive and being awake consciousness, okay? So, let me see where we want to go. Does anyone have any questions with all of that?
Hi, I'm Eliane.
Hi.
You said you had a personal near-death experience. Were you, as a medical person, aware of that process happening, and does everyone go through a choice?
In my own experience, was I aware?
No, but when you witnessed a car accident, say, or anyone else dying, could you watch that process where they are up there and say, do I come back or do I keep going?
Oh, yes, ma'am. So oftentimes, that's a wonderful question. I think she's wondering, since I had the choice to come back or not come back. That does happen, and it's going to be marginal. So more oftentimes the death process is very natural, organic, and it completes its cycle. If we're in a full CPR situation, it's less than like 0.1% actually come back to full cognitive functioning from the medical perspective. Ultimately, it has, my understanding now, it has to do with soul contracts, karmic balancing, and ultimately choice, which we have here in this incarnation. As we know, as being human, we have the choice. But for that, there's going to be many, many factors. So more oftentimes the answer would be no. It would be a completed cycle in the way that I had addressed before. But from time to time, yes, we would see, oftentimes in heroin and fentanyl overdoses, we can get them back pretty quick. And a lot of those guys have the in-betweens, some suicide attempts, that kind of thing. Wonderful question. And so that brings me around to navigating, so not wanting to be the weird person on scene. But you know what's amazing is they could feel it. The firefighters could feel it. And so even though I wasn't talking about it, they could sense that I was doing something. So finally they're like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know, But I was finally, by this time, I was reputable. People knew that I knew what I was doing. I had a lot of respect. So I started to kind of share little bits with some people that were close to me. I have to tell you, because of my abilities, in EMS, there's black clouds and white clouds, and the black clouds are the people who get all of the super gnarly, crazy trauma calls, and the white clouds are the person who passes out and gets up and is fine, the more benign calls. Why was a significant black cloud? Because being present in death is a big part of my dharma. So a lot of people liked to work with me because they wanted to be able to run those calls. And so they were the ones that were like, "What is this? Like, what are you doing?" And so I still wasn't ready to be fully out and fully expressed. But I have to tell you guys, it was a SIDS call that changed everything for me. And this is a 3-week-old baby. And the firefighter comes out running literally, to me and hot potatoes me this dead 3-week-old that is no bigger than a Cabbage Patch doll. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many 911 calls you've run or dead bodies you've seen. When you're holding a 3-week-old that is not breathing, you freeze for just a moment. I'm a mother. My kids were not much older at that time. And in that moment, Spirit came and just knocked me literally out of my body. And I, Sarah, watched from the top of the ambulance, or like on the inside in the cab, as I ran the call, delegated to the firefighters, got the baby to the hospital. Well, baby made it. Okay? Baby made it. And that's wonderful, but that call I was like, okay, no way. Like, you can come through my hands, you can come over the top of me, you can tell me what's going to happen before it does, you can show me deceased, loved ones and angels, but I'm not cool with you knocking me out of my body. No way, I'm too type A and too much of a control freak for that, right? So I was like, what is this? I'm not comfortable with this. I have to get educated. So that was the call that changed everything for me, because at that point, I was like, I knew I was going to have to face my own fear. I knew I was going to have to face my own shadow. And one way to combat fear and insecurity is through knowledge. So I started to become educated. Now, I got to tell you, I very much appreciate like a grounded, practical experience and curriculum. Initially, I started with Reiki, and then I studied shamanism for many years in many forms, medical intuition, mediumship, energy healing, holistic healing, and ultimately what ended up happening was now I specialize many years later in psychic surgery. So after going through many years of education while simultaneously still running the 911 calls, Spirit was leading me to become an energy worker. So let's look at the polarity there, shall we? Paramedic in Compton, energy healer. Right? I was like, yeah, no thanks. Thanks, but yeah, no, I think I'm good, But what ended up happening was I was getting gnarlier and gnarlier and gnarlier calls, and I knew that Spirit was going to start pushing me out if I didn't listen. So ultimately, I just started working on friends and family. I had no idea what I was doing, but I did like 40 or 50 free sessions, and I would just listen to my own guidance and see what was happening and utilize the tools that I had learned about. And once I kind of got established and proficient in that, then, one person would go tell two, and they'd go tell more, and it's been this really beautiful unfolding. And so after many years of doing that, then the next intuitive hit was to write this book. And this is Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. And I self-published this book, and it has been an absolute incredible ride. And I have to tell you, in sharing this was kind of another one of those things. There was reluctance in writing it, because as I was writing it, I've got quite the past. I was a bit of a wild child. And my intuition was like, put all of it in there. Like all of your shadow, all of your mistakes, right? And at one point, I was literally banging my head on the table next to the computer as I was writing it, because I was like, I don't want to put all that in there, like really? But I just knew, like, all of it has to go in. And it's been so beautiful, you guys. And again, the reason I share that is because oftentimes in our field, we can be reluctant to share our gifts. We can be reluctant, and we kind of like hide, or we kind of shy back, and we're like, well, I'll do it, but only a little, right? Or maybe, or I'll do it later. We're really good at that sometimes. And so I put the book out, and it just magically unfolded. And I was blessed to be on Hay House Radio and NPR and Coast to Coast with George Norrie, and I've done some amazing talks. And now I'm here with you guys sharing this, and it's just been this incredible unfolding, and it's just a really, really beautiful experience. And so I think what I would like to wrap up with, and then I'd like to answer, so do some Q&A and kind of get into what you guys have going on. It's been a ride for all of us. All of us have light and dark. All of us have strengths and weaknesses. All of us have fears and insecurities, right? But if we can muster the courage to step into whatever the fullness of your expression is, and your expression is as valid and matters as much as mine or anybody else, and your light matters and is as valid as mine or anybody else. And again, we're living in this world where we as sensitives and conscious beings are being invited to please step up. Embrace your own giftedness, embrace your own power, shine your own light. That's why we picked that song, Shine Your Light, because the world needs us now more than ever. So thank you for hearing that.
Have you seen people that haven't been able to exit their bodies? Not enough energy internally or what have you?
Like they began the process of death but couldn't go. I have not seen that. I've seen many people who were dead way before their bodies exited them. There's many people that are just lifeless and just kind of shuffling through. And they've just lost their connection to spirit and to their own light and their own power and love. And that's, pretty rampant in our society. But to answer your question specifically, no, it was a very organic experience, and it happens pretty effortlessly.
Can you talk a little bit about your psychic surgery practice?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Psychic surgery wasn't something that I necessarily intended to begin. I didn't even really know what it was. It makes sense to me now with the background with anatomy, physiology, and the Western medical background that I do. So when I work with people, and I have clients both in person and worldwide, and we can see I can see the etheric template of that person plus their energetic grid. So when somebody opens to me and gives me permission, then I can go into their field and I can see, the imbalances, the blocks, the trauma, the addictions, the trauma, like whatever is stuck in the field. And then it's through intention, and I actually have 3 surgeons that work through me. They're my principal assistant, if you will, that I've been working with now for many years. And I so appreciate them just in the level of integrity and impeccability. They never talk. Sometimes spirits or guides talk. They never say a word, but they just have an intention, and it's a very pristine intention of ultimate vitality and healing. So what we do with them, through my hands, as I'm working on somebody, we clear the auric field, we'll balance the hemispheres, we'll flush or balance the chakra systems and flush out the meridians. That's just the basic, and that's going to be a total system overhaul. And then for each individual, there's going to be specific areas in the body where there's the blockages and the traumas. And utilizing my hands or the intention with these surgeons, then sometimes it looks like debriding a wound, or it looks like actual surgery to me, but it's with energy, and the person can usually feel it. But it's like clearing out the blocks and the traumas and the cysts and all of that kind of stuff to help integrate and get them back into balance. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if, after so many people that you had encountered when they were dying, if any of them came around back to you and wanted to pass on messages or say things or contact people, or are they asking you to do things?
Yes, that's another great question. Oh, you guys have great questions. Yes, that was a challenge for me at the beginning, especially since I still wasn't open to it, and I didn't understand why Dead Guy was now following me home and was keeping me up at nighttime. It was a really humbling and helpless feeling, right? Because I wasn't able to do anything with that information. It's like, oh great, now what, right? once I began to get educated on mediumship, so mediumship is specific to deceased human spirits and the protocol for communicating with them. And I didn't understand that I had a choice, that I could choose to engage or not. I was doing this whole like, oh, I'm a victim, this is too much, blah, blah, blah. And it's once I was like, oh, wait a second, no, I have a choice and I can engage or not engage. So to answer your question, yes, it did happen. As I got more proficient in the field and started sharing more and people knew more, then it had to be a very specific scenario where it would not do more harm than good to communicate and relay to the family what I was seeing. Does that make sense? It did ultimately happen a few times in the 911 system, and I do that all the time in my private practice because obviously the people are asking, right? Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So when you, in a situation where there's someone approaching you and you choose to engage or not, what makes you decide that one person is okay to speak to and one is not?
Deceased spirit.
Or anything that...
Entity,
Yeah.
any energy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there's nothing to fear in any of the energies. Light, dark, it's polarity and duality, and this dimension is comprised of that. We have to have one to have the other. And so the more we can understand that there's nothing to fear in the darkness, then everything begins to balance and open. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But I get it. It's a lot, right? Especially when you're being bombarded. So that's a great question again. Your bandwidth. Like your physical bandwidth, your energetic bandwidth, where are you? Do you have the reserve? Are you open to communicating? Do you have the bandwidth to be able to handle and navigate that? Or are you maxed through life? So you have the choice to be able to say yes or no. And you can set the intention. So a lot of times with deceased human spirits, I would just, if I'm not open, I'd just be like, thanks but no thanks. And then, yes, I see you, I understand that you're dead, and I'm sorry I can't help you. They may linger for just a minute, but ultimately they would choose usually to go to find another medium somewhere around. If you do see a deceased human spirit and you don't know what to do, a good rule of thumb is just to ask them, hey, what's up? Like, what's your name, right? Why are you here? You know? And for me, I would ask them what their message is. Why are you coming here right now? What do you want from me? Okay? And then ultimately it would be navigating. I mean, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with these sensitivities. Okay? So just because you can doesn't mean you should. Okay? When I first started opening to my abilities, I saw a deceased spirit. It was a grandma behind a gallon, the bread aisle of Target. Right? And I was just like, oh, I see your grandma. Like, I was trying to help. Oh, open up a can, you guys. Like, burst into tears. Didn't have a good relationship with grandma. Oh, wow, did I learn a lesson there, right? Just because we can doesn't mean we should. It's informed consent. It's when they're asking, okay? And so I hope that's helpful just in navigating the human, but you always have, ultimately, you have choice here. And that's for all of it. Entities, visuals, auditory. Auditory can be really destabilizing, but there's a lot of powerful grounding tools and techniques. The more in your body you can be, the more grounded your cells will be, all of your organ systems will be, and you'll be able to expand and hold both the light and the dark equally in balance, masculine, feminine, light, dark, and then we can work with non-dual currents, and then it's really powerful stuff that we can do. So, brilliant questions, you guys.
Can you talk a little bit more about near-death, death, and how that has shifted for you over the years, and how that has affected your view of the afterlife?
Absolutely. So again, seeing as much death as I have, it's shifted in my head to now where I see death as cause for celebration. Because to me, the soul graduated. They completed their cycle of what they were here to do, and they graduated. And so the near death is close to what this lovely lady had asked about are some people given that choice? And yes, there's definitely those situations. And again, there's no one-size-fits-all way to die, just like there's no one-size-fits-all way to live, okay? Death is as unique for each individual is as your life is to you, okay? That said, I did notice some patterns that I shared with you between the difference between the medical and the traumatic death. But to me, over the years, it began to, at least for the person who was in transition, it was a cause for celebration. It took any and all fear away for me. I don't have any fear of death because I've seen so much of it physically, watching. So even if there is pain, just know that it's going to be temporary. And then it's like taking off a heavy coat. You're still fully intact in who you are, what you know, your likes, your dislikes, like all of the data and information from in this incarnation stays. It's just that you're light, like free. There's no more pain, taking off a heavy coat, and then begins the process of integration with family, integration with religious archetypes, going into life review processes. That's a whole other talk in and of itself too. But please just know, you guys, death is as natural as birth. It is absolutely inevitable for every single one of us in here. None of us know when, okay? And so anchoring that, live your life now. Like, eat the cake. Spend the money. Go on the trip. Do it. Like, just do it, okay?
Taking off a heavy coat, a beautiful metaphor. I think it was Daniel Brinkley that speaks about taking off a tight shoe, is how he puts it, I think. Well, kind of a follow-on to Paul's question, suicide. This idea that if you don't see it all the way through, you're destined to come back. The movie Beetlejuice, if you'll remember that film from early 90s, that speaks to that idea. Anything about suicide?
Yes, I've seen many. And a lot of times those were challenging for me because I could literally see the person trying to get back in their body. My understanding is that the soul will ultimately in transition. The whole will never leave a fragment of itself behind. So it's not the soul fragment or the human that commits suicide is never going to be banished forever and ever. That said, there may be a bit more karmic balancing, there may be a bit more energetic kind of integration to happen before the soul can actually go through the process of transition.
It's chilling to think that souls are trying to claw themselves back in after making that choice.
Oh yeah, that was pretty wretched to see.
Is that what you feel that it is? Like, oh my God, I made such
Not
a terrible
always.
choice?
Oh no, not always at all. Mm-mm.
Thank you again.
Mm-hmm.
Great talk.
Excellent group, you guys.